Okay, calm down.
So we have an article, a New York Times smear McCarthyite hit piece that accuses some people of being spreaders of pro-China disinformation. How a U.S. tech mogul used nonprofits to sow Chinese propaganda, and this was published by the wonderful New York Times.
Yes.
It's about Neville Roy Singham, and his wife is Jodie Evans of CODEPINK, and here they are. Here's the photo of them. A global web of Chinese propaganda leads to a U.S. tech mogul. The Times unraveled a financial network that stretches from Chicago to Shanghai and uses American nonprofits to push Chinese talking points worldwide. They start off by talking about this group called No Cold War. And they say, on the surface, No Cold War is a loose collective run mostly by American and British activists who say the West's rhetoric against China has distracted from issues like climate change and racial injustice. In fact, a New York Times investigation found it is part of a lavishly funded influence campaign that defends China and pushes its propaganda. At the center is a charismatic American millionaire, Neville Roy Singham, who is known as a socialist benefactor of far left causes. The son of a leftist academic, Archibald Singham, Mr. Singham is a longtime activist who founded the Chicago-based software consultancy ThoughtWorks. There, Mr. Singham came across as a charming showman who prided himself on creating an egalitarian corporate culture. He was unabashed about his politics. A former company technical director, Majdi Haroun, recalled Mr. Singham lecturing him on the Marxist revolutionary Che Guevara. Mr. Haroun said employees sometimes jokingly called each other comrade. In 2017, Mr. Singham married Jodie Evans, a former Democratic political advisor and the co-founder of CODEPINK. The problem with this piece, though, is that among many other problems, it talks about disinformation, but it doesn't actually lay out what the disinformation is. What do you think, Eugene?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. I mean, I think there's some allusions in there in different ways to Xinjiang. I think actually maybe talking about poverty alleviation and climate change. So, I mean, that's what it's basically come down to when we're talking about this issue of quote unquote disinformation, is that things actually don't even need to be untrue. They don't need to be, things that could be based in fact. They are just, in fact, just things that people and that the American government doesn't like. And, the New York Times that, of course, brought us the Iraq War in many different ways, you think would have a little bit of a better relationship to the facts. But I mean, this sort of sleight of hand, like that's the real thing about this article. If you read it, there's actually no evidence of anything. There's no evidence whatsoever that any law is being broken, because it isn't. And the only sort of, negative relationships are, there's an office that's in the same office. He was at a seminar and took notes in a notebook with a hammer and sickle. There are some people who do so. It's that dumb. There's no actual relationship that they could prove anything. So it's all just innuendo that's designed to scare people from standing up and saying anything that is against the main agenda of the fossil fuel industry, of the military industrial complex, all these cold warriors trying to, save nuclear saber rattle with China and with Russia. I mean, the whole goal is just like all these McCarthyite scare tactics, not to find any sort of facts, but just to, scare people around, actually saying what's right, and to consider collaboration with China to be some sort of crime, to consider arguing for peace to be some sort of crime. I mean, the whole thing is actually disgusting. And for the New York Times to put this out, I mean, talk about lavishly funded networks. I mean, that's one of the most lavishly funded corporations on earth, owned by an oligarchic family who's on the same company for, dozens and dozens of decades. So, is this a lavishly funded influence operation to push the views of the United States government? Because that's all they're doing in the article. But again, there's nothing in that article that's illegal. There's nothing in the article that proves any sort of connection between the Chinese government and any of the organizations that are listed in there. The tropes that are used are somewhat absurd, to be honest with you. I mean, I have to say, Jodie Evans, who is a great person, by the way, and who has, without any shadow of a doubt, done more to actually help human beings than all three of those reporters put together times 100, is almost, I mean, the way she's presented, to me, it feels racist. They basically are saying like, oh, she was great, and then she married this Jamaican guy, and all these global South communists have now, taken over her mind and turned her into some sort of Manchurian candidate on China. And it just shows how dumb or how ignorant and or how malicious the writers are, is when they frame her, they say she once was the campaign manager for Jerry Brown, and now she's pushing pro-China talking points. I thought that was interesting, Katie, partially because on April 6th of 2023, Politico ran an article by Jonathan Martin that said, Jerry Brown is angry. Why is America barreling into a new Cold War? The ultimate elder statesman sees huge economic consequences to a superpower decoupling. Another serious banking failure, mortgage meltdown. We can't stabilize the world economy without China. And it goes on and on like that, him continuing to push détente, which of course he was. So in a way, it's actually 100% consistent.
Right.
But the whole thing is laid out in a way to make it seem like she's somehow moved from the center to the margins and is under the influence of these evil people, including her evil husband, who, must be bad because he's, got this vaguely, Caribbean. It's almost like the Live and Let Die villain in the James Bond movie in 1973, some evil villain on an island paid for by China capturing people. So, at the end of the day, the entire thing is a smear job. It's disgusting. And I think we just have to keep coming back to the basic point. There is actually nothing in there proving that anyone did anything illegal or that there are any connections between the Chinese government and any of the organizations or individuals who are listed, that any of their activities or actions are being guided by that. And nothing that you can say can actually prove that. So to create an article that's designed to create that impression is obviously designed to create an impression that is false. It's totally false, and that can only serve one goal, and that is to increase the warmongering around China. And even you look at some of the quotes that they have in there, oh, well, people are taking important issues and they're actually manipulating them. Well, how is that possible? If the issue is important, should you not raise it? And it basically is to blur the lines about what is and isn't Chinese, which means that what you're going to do is you're going to shade towards the State Department. You're going to shade towards the Pentagon. You're going to not say what you really think because you're like, well, I don't think we should have nuclear war with China. But if I say that, they'll say that I'm pushing Chinese talking points. I do think we should collaborate with China on climate change, and they are the country that's putting the most money into clean energy. Well, you don't want to say that because those are Chinese talking points. How do I know that? Well, Senator Ted Cruz and Congressman Jim Comer have already sent a letter demanding that the DOJ investigate the National Resources Defense Council. One of the reasons why is because they said that China is a leader in clean energy, which everyone knows it is. They called that a Chinese talking point. And so at the end of the day, basically what we're seeing here is a redux of the McCarthyite 1950s, where in order to close down the policy space to create a very destructive Cold War that, by the way, wasn't so cold in the global South, where the US was funding all these wars where millions of people were ultimately killed. But on top of that, they're trying to do the same thing again here with the possibility of nuclear war in two different countries, China and Russia, staring us down the barrel, which is obviously crazy. The climate change just destroying the entire planet, which is obviously bad. And instead of thinking, how do we collaborate and cooperate with the other major country on earth, they want to go to war with and destroy them. And how could you convince people to do something that crazy? You have to create this entire narrative that anyone who says anything that questions that is some sort of spy, some sort of whatever. And it just is so infuriating because they're either dumb, which I don't think they are. I think these people are actually very smart, which means that they're deliberately putting out these totally false hatchet job articles that are designed to kneecap actual advocacy against nuclear war and in favor of climate change, and to make people seem like there's something that they're not, some sort of controlled entity by China, which again, there is no evidence of that whatsoever. The New York Times could find not one shred of evidence. All they could do is have innuendo, no evidence whatsoever, no crimes whatsoever. So the whole thing is totally pernicious. I think the three authors should be ashamed of themselves. I think the editors should be ashamed of themselves. Obviously, they aren't. I want to know who they're working with to put out an article like this. They're allegedly all the news that's fit to print, and they can't find one shred of evidence that puts any connection to the thing that they're saying. Why are they doing that? Let's ask them. I mean, let's ask that question. I think, to be honest with you, that some element of this is directly coming from the intelligence agencies. In the context of access journalism, I'm happy to say that. If they can say whatever they want to say, well, then let's just put it out there. In the context of access journalism, why would you do something like this if you care about journalistic integrity? You wouldn't. The only reason you would do something like this is if you want to serve an agenda. And maybe the agenda isn't. I don't have any evidence, but I got about as much evidence as they have to accuse anybody else. So
yeah, these are certainly State Department talking points.
Yeah.
So they are spreading disinformation.
Yeah, they are
They
indeed
are.
spreading disinformation.
Right.
So it's unfortunate that something like this would happen. But this is, I think people should go to the People's Forum website at, I believe it's peoplesforumnyc.org, but just Google the People's Forum. There's a petition you can sign to stand up against McCarthyism and red baiting. And I think what we learned from the first McCarthyite situation, what we learned from the rise of fascism in Germany, is if you don't stand up right away, they will ultimately come for you. And it might seem like, oh, these far left groups like, the People's Forum and Tricontinental or whatever, they're just going to get them.
And
But like I
CODEPINK,
said, they
right.
already got and CODEPINK, they already have the National Resources Defense Council in their crosshairs. And that's the most mainstream of groups. So, I mean, you just got to ask yourself, I mean, for Christ's sake, the entire Republican primary is calling Biden a pro-communist Marxist. So it gives you a sense of where the country is shifting on this issue of red baiting. And if we don't stand up and push back, we're going to be in real trouble.
Wow. Wow. I hope they watch this.
I doubt they will. I mean, maybe they will because they're wondering how it's going over, but I just generally assume they don't care
Yeah.
whatsoever. But if anyone knows any of those authors, David Fahrenholt's the only one I can really remember. I hope you let them know how sad and sorry they are to have put their names on top of something that can't prove anything at all, but goes to try to hurt and harm the efforts and the careers of people who are just trying to do the right thing. I mean, look at what Tricontinental Institute for Social Research is doing, trying to address the issue of hunger all around the world, trying to illuminate efforts to eliminate poverty all around the world, lifting up the struggles of the poorest people, the shack dwellers in South Africa, whose leaders are constantly assassinated left and right. I mean, these are the types of things that are coming out of there. So why are they being targeted? Why are they being targeted? I mean, it really just makes you wonder what the whole purpose is behind this. So it truly is unfortunate.
And it's coordinated because the Daily
Well,
Beast had a
for
piece.
peace. They're training for peace. The last thing they did coming out against the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, saying, remember what took place. We don't need another nuclear war. So you can't come out and say anything about nuclear war. You can't come out and talk about the military industrial complex and the impact it has on climate change. I mean, those are the things that CODEPINK is actually doing, disrupting the warmongers wherever they may go, raising the correct questions, right in the face of these people, the Anthony Blinkens and the others in the world. Why are they being targeted? I mean, if there's no evidence that there's no evidence whatsoever, there's no story there. So it's just this fake thing that's been created to take organizations that are and individuals who are effectively pushing back against the worst forms of war propaganda, climate denialism, and so on and so forth, and trying to tar them with some brush that means people won't listen. It's really sad. And it's just like the whole legion of liberals who in the 1950s ran in the other direction as soon as McCarthy came. Before there was any issue, they were happy to associate with them. Just like a lot of people, by the way, have been happy to associate with the people listed in this article until something comes out, and then all of a sudden they run in the other direction because they don't want to act get in any sort of trouble, with the authorities. It's really unbelievable.
Yeah, and speaking of how disgusting this article is, I just wanted to share something that they write about Jodie Evans. That's just so gross. Miss Evans, 68, was once a Democratic insider who managed the 1982 presidential campaign of Governor Jerry Brown. After the 2001 terrorist attacks, she reinvented herself as an activist. She became known for pink peace sign earrings and sit-ins that ended with her arrest. She helped form CODEPINK to protest the looming war in Iraq. The group became notorious for disrupting Capitol Hill hearings. What is that? After the 2001 terrorist attack, she reinvented herself.
Yeah.
What is that? Like, what? They're making it sound like this is some espionage.
No, I know. I mean, they're making it sound as if somehow she didn't have anti-war politics.
Yeah.
I didn't know Jodie prior to 2001, but I feel pretty confident that she had roughly the same politics. I mean, it's not. I mean, that's the thing is they're presenting people as. And honestly, even if someone does change, you can't change what you do. You can't change your mind. You can't have different political positions. So it's taking all just like very basic political activities, very logical political stands, and trying to take them and turn them into something different by creating this fake, totally false, totally unattributed, no evidence charge that basically all the people listed are Chinese spies, and then make people think that they shouldn't stand up and they shouldn't say anything. I mean, it's shameful.
I think there's also some projection that happens because they assume that to change or have ideas that are unpopular or not unpopular, that are against the elite media narrative, you must be getting something for it. Like you must have some ulterior motives, like who's paying you or who is giving you gifts. Like, why are you doing this? And they're just showing themselves. Like they can't imagine that people just have convictions and political ideas.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think they're so wrapped up in this sort of status quo establishment world that they can't possibly believe that anything else is true. That entire world, which is, heavily shaped by this sort of, postmodern academic pro-capitalist politics, but that says question all grand narratives and all that kind of nonsense, which means question every narrative except the establishment narrative, but creates this basis that sort of counter-hegemonic views and narratives are somehow illegitimate for whatever they may be. That ultimately also is quite frankly racist, because it comes from a perception that, let's say something does come from China, that somehow it's illegitimate, as if people in
Right.
China cannot have their own political thoughts and views and concepts, and that those cannot be in a neutral playing field, either right or wrong. I mean, I think that in and of itself is an issue. I mean, I saw a similar thing. I always point out to people to read this old article from, I think it was last year, in the New York Times, where they were profiling a woman from Guinea-Bissau, a former liberation fighter who, is in favor of Russia and the war in Ukraine. And the tone of the article is so paternalistic. It's shocking. And I just thought, who is this writer? I mean, what have you ever done? This woman fought to liberate her country from Portuguese colonialism, and they're basically mocking her in the context and the tone. So it just shows. I mean, the very fact that almost on all these issues, the new Cold War with China, the NATO proxy war in Ukraine, all around the world, these things are deeply unpopular by people of all political persuasions. Most people want to go in a different way, and none of that really penetrates the reality of the New York Times and these individuals. They're so conceited and so wrapped up in their own knowledge production, their elite Harvard University circles, which again I mentioned because David Fairnholt and his private hedge fund executive wife both went there, and her father, by the way, was a top level executive. They're so wrapped up in these hyper establishment, rich people, US 1% narratives that think America should run the world and everyone else should sit down and shut up, that if anyone does anything else against it, that somehow you must be paid, and that we can write an article full of innuendo. I mean, I don't really know anything about the guy who is the New York Times person. I'm sure they'd be very mad if I wrote some sort of article talking about that they're all controlled by the CIA and the State Department by using, this guy was once in a place that was there. He had an American flag pin on his lapel. One time he even went to the White House. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's completely ridiculous. And only in the context of things that go against the narrative of the US establishment can it even be presented in this kind of way. Anything that's challenging the establishment, they say you must have 8,000 pages of footnotes. If you say that someone is influenced by this person, you have to have the secret video of them shaking hands, like John DeLorean, putting the money in the suitcase for the cocaine. I mean, it's you don't even know what to do with these things. But again, you can go to the website of the People's Forum in New York, go to the People's Forum, check them out, Google that, put that in, sign the petition to stand up against red baiting and McCarthyism. We don't just have to stand for this kind of thing. We can fight back, we can push back. People can stand up for what's right. And if we learn from what's happened in the past and these red scares, we just don't have a choice. I mean, because so many fantastic things that have gone on have been destroyed. I mean, the civil rights movement was set back by 10 years because of McCarthyism. The labor movement was completely destroyed and defanged because of McCarthyism. You want to know
all the
why
things that these people want to happen.
There it is. It wouldn't have happened had people done something and stood up when the time was right. But it's always easy to stand up when there's no consequences. Right. It's only hard when there are consequences. And this is what this article is trying to make it do. They want to make it seem like there are consequences. If you say anything about Ukraine, you're a Russian agent. If you say anything about China, you're a Chinese spy. Everyone's a Manchurian candidate. You can't trust anyone. There's disinformation all over the internet. The whole thing is designed to scare people into inaction around the issues that they know are right. And I think that that's what we have to stand up against. This is totally fact-free, totally nonsensical smearing going on almost every critical issue facing us on the planet.
And I'll link to the petition that Eugene mentioned, and here it is. I just want to show you. So McCarthyism is back. Together we can stop it. And you can find this at the People's Forum and Tricontinental. I'll put a link in. But this is a great open letter, and you can sign it. I've signed it. A bunch of great people have signed it. And it says, we stand together against the rise of a new McCarthyism that is targeting peace activists, critics of U.S. foreign policy, and Chinese Americans. Despite increased intimidation, we remain steadfast in our mission to foster peace and international solidarity, countering the narrative of militarism, hostility, and fear. And here you can go and join these great names. So we'll put a link to that in the description.